Mlle. Orly possessed a good strong figure, ruddy cheeks, hair that was changing from brown to grey, and a determined eye. She wore a man's hat about the farm, and an old blue army overcoat when it was cold, and sometimes top boots. Mlle. Orly had never thought of marrying. She had never been in love. At the age of 20 she had received a proposal, which she had promptly declined, and at the age of 50 she had not yet lived to regret it. So she was quite alone in the world, except for her dog Ponto, and the Negroes who lived in her cabins and worked her crops, and the fowls, a few cows, a couple of mules, her gun, with which she shot chicken hawks, and her religion. One morning Mlle. Orly stood upon her gallery, contemplating, with arms akimbo, a small band of very small children who, to all intents and purposes, might have fallen from the clouds, so unexpected and bewildering was their coming, and so unwelcome. They were the children of her nearest neighbor, Odile, who was not such a near neighbor, after all. The young woman had appeared but 5 minutes before, accompanied by these 4 children. In her arms she carried little Lodi. She dragged Teen by an unwilling hand, while Markline and Marklet followed with irresolute steps. Her face was red and disfigured from tears and excitement. She had been summoned to a neighboring parish by the dangerous illness of her mother. Her husband was away in Texas, it seemed to her a million miles away, and Valson was waiting with the mule cart to drive her to the station. "It's no question, Mlle. Orly, you just got to keep those youngsters for me till I come back. Dear Sate, I wouldn't bother you with them if it was any other way to do. Make 'em mine you, Mlle. Orly, don't spare 'em. Me, there, I'm half crazy between the children, Unlan not home, and maybe not even to find Po Momon alive encore, a harrowing possibility which drove Odile to take a final hasty and convulsive leave of her disconsolate family. She left them crowded into the narrow strip of shade on the porch of their long, low house. The white sunlight was beating in on the white old boards. Some chickens were scratching in the grass at the foot of the steps, and one had boldly mounted, and was stepping heavily, solemnly, and aimlessly across the gallery. There was a pleasant odor of pinks in the air, and the sound of Negro's laughter was coming across the flowering cotton field. Mlle. Orly stood contemplating the children. She looked with a critical eye upon Markline, who had been left staggering beneath the weight of the chubby Lodi. She surveyed with the same calculating air Marklet, mingling her silent tears with the audible grief and rebellion of Teen. During those few contemplative moments she was collecting herself, determining upon a line of action which should be identical with a line of duty. She began by feeding them. If Mlle. Orly's responsibilities might have begun and ended there, they could easily have been dismissed, for her larder was amply provided against an emergency of this nature. But little children are not little pigs. They require and demand attentions which were wholly unexpected by Mlle. Orly, and which she was ill prepared to give. She was, indeed, very inapt in her management of Odile's children during the first few days. How could she know that Marklet always wept when spoken to in a loud and commanding tone of voice? It was a peculiarity of Marklet's. She became acquainted with Teen's passion for flowers only when he had plucked all the choicest gardenias and pinks for the apparent purpose of critically studying their botanical construction. "Tea ain't enough to tell him, Mlle. Orly," Markline instructed her. "You got to tie him in a chair. It's what Momon all time do. He's bad, she tie him in a chair." The chair in which Mlle. Orly tied Teen was roomy and comfortable, and he seized the opportunity to take a nap in it, the afternoon being warm. At night, when she ordered them one and all to bed as she would have shooed the chickens into the hen house, they stayed uncomprehending before her. What about the little white nightgowns that had to be taken from the pillow slip in which they were brought over, and shaken by some strong hand till they snapped like ox whips? What about the tub of water which had to be brought and set in the middle of the floor, in which the little tired, dusty, sun-browned feet had every one to be washed sweet and clean? And it made Markline and Marklet laugh merrily, The idea that Mumselle Awley should for a moment have believed that Teen could fall asleep without being told the story of Croquemitten or Loopga, or both, or that Lodi could fall asleep at all without being rocked and sung to. "I tell you, Aunt Ruby," Mumselle Awley informed her cook in confidence, "I'd rather manage a dozen plantation than for children. It's terracent. Bont. Don't talk to me about children. 10 inspected such as you would know everything about them, Mumselle Awley. I see dat plainly yesterday you I spied dat lil chilly playing wid your basket of keys. You don't know dat makes chillun grow up hard-headed, to play wid keys. Dey like it make 'em teeth hard to look in a looking glass. Them's the things you got to know in the raisin and management to chillun." Mumselle Awley certainly did not pretend or aspire to such subtle and far-reaching knowledge on the subject as Aunt Ruby possessed, who had raised 5 and buried 6 in her day. She was glad enough to learn a few little mother tricks to serve the moment's need. Teen's sticky fingers compelled her to unearth white aprons that she had not worn for years, and she had to accustom herself to his moist kisses, the expressions of an affectionate and exuberant nature. She got down her sewing basket, which she seldom used, from the top shelf of the armoire, and placed it within the ready and easy reach which torn slips and buttonless waists demanded. It took her some days to become accustomed to the laughing, the crying, the chattering that echoed through the house and around it all day long. And it was not the first or the second night that she could sleep comfortably with little Lodi's hot, plump body pressed close against her, and the little one's warm breath beating her cheek like the fanning of a bird's wing. But at the end of 2 weeks Mumselle Awley had grown quite used to these things, and she no longer complained. It was also at the end of 2 weeks that Mumselle Awley, one evening, looking away toward the crib where the cattle were being fed, saw Valson's blue cart turning the bend of the road. Odile sat beside the mulatto, upright and alert. As they drew near, the young woman's beaming face indicated that her homecoming was a happy one. But this coming, unannounced and unexpected, threw Mumselle Awley into a flutter that was almost agitation. The children had to be gathered. Where was Teen? Yonder in the shed, putting an edge on his knife at the grinder stone. And Markline and Marklet, cutting and fashioning doll rags in the corner of the gallery. As for Lodi, she was safe enough in Mumselle Awley's arms, and she had screamed with delight at sight of the familiar blue cart which was bringing her mother back to her. The excitement was all over, and they were gone. How still it was when they were gone! Mumselle Awley stood upon the gallery, looking and listening. She could no longer see the cart. The red sunset and the blue-grey twilight had together flung a purple mist across the fields and road that hid it from her view. She could no longer hear the wheezing and creaking of its wheels, but she could still faintly hear the shrill, glad voices of the children. She turned into the house. There was much work awaiting her, for the children had left a sad disorder behind them, but she did not at once set about the task of righting it. Mumselle Awley seated herself beside the table. She gave one slow glance through the room, into which the evening shadows were creeping and deepening around her solitary figure. She let her head fall down upon her bended arm, and began to cry. Oh, but she cried, not softly, as women often do. She cried like a man, with sobs that seemed to tear her very soul. She did not notice Ponto licking her hand,